It's funny how in life, you often find yourself doing things you never thought you would. Things you don't expect to have to do, not in a million years. And that's how I ended up where I am today, standing at the threshold of a hospital room, feeling like my entire world was slipping through my fingers. My name is Lily, and the story I'm about to tell isn't just about sacrifice. It's about the kind of sacrifice that changes everything. My son, Evan, has always been my world. From the moment I brought him into this world, I dedicated my entire life to him. Everything I did, every decision I made, was for him. So when I found out that my only child needed an incredibly expensive surgery, something so life-threatening and urgent that there was no time to waste, I didn't think twice. I didn't even pause. I just knew I had to save him. Evan had been struggling with a rare heart condition that we discovered when he was in his early 20s. Doctors said there was no cure, just a surgery that might give him more years. Maybe more years of life, of opportunity, of hope. The price tag was astronomical. $1 million. They made it sound like it was the only option. It was a gamble, but one I was willing to take. I didn't have that kind of money, of course. But when you're a mother in that situation, the idea of money becomes irrelevant. I sold everything I had. I didn't have a choice. I knew I had a house, a car, a few things I'd inherited from my late parents that were worth something, even if they weren't much. My jewelry, the rings my husband had given me over the years, everything, I sold it all. I gave up the home I had spent years creating memories in. I sold my car, something I loved, because the thought of losing my son was far worse than losing any material possession. I thought, this is it. This is what a mother does. This is what I have to do. It wasn't just about the money either. There were late nights spent researching hospitals, reading through countless medical papers, and talking to doctors about the risks. There were endless phone calls, every single day, trying to make sure the surgery would happen, praying it would work, hoping that somehow this investment, this sacrifice, would make everything worth it. The hospital bill wasn't just a number on a piece of paper. It was my entire life savings, the blood, sweat, and tears of every dollar I had ever earned. It was years of working long hours at a job I didn't love but stuck with, because I wanted to ensure that my son would never go without. And when I handed over that money, when I signed away my house, my car, everything that had once been mine, I did it all with one goal in mind. I wanted Evan to live. I wanted him to have a future, to live the life that I couldn't give him in other ways. And in that moment, as I stood outside his hospital room, the reality of my actions began to hit me. I stood there holding that stack of medical bills, feeling a deep, overwhelming sense of anxiety. What if it wasn't enough? What if I had made a mistake? What if he didn't survive the surgery? But that fear wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the silence. It was the fact that my son, who had always been my everything, was behind that door, and I couldn't even bring myself to ask him if he understood. I couldn't bring myself to ask if he even cared that I had given up everything to save him. I remember looking around the sterile hallways of the hospital, the buzzing of fluorescent lights overhead, and feeling a wave of loneliness I hadn't expected. I had done everything right, everything a mother was supposed to do, but in that moment I realized how easily one person's sacrifice could go unnoticed. Evan was in that room, fighting for his life, and I was here, standing at the door, hoping that one day he would see me as more than just the woman who'd handed over everything she had. I wanted him to understand that this wasn't just about money, it was about me. About my devotion to him, about everything I had sacrificed so he could have a chance at life. But in that moment, all I could do was wait. Wait for the surgery to be over. Wait for him to wake up, and wait for everything to feel okay again. I told myself that after the surgery, we'd be okay. I'd made the ultimate sacrifice, but it would be worth it. I would have my son, and he would have a future, and everything would be right again. What I didn't know then was that the consequences of this choice would reach far beyond just the financial strain. What I didn't know was that this moment, this sacrifice, would change everything. And I didn't know that Evan, the son I had given everything for, would never see it the way I did. It was only a few weeks after Evan's surgery when I first started noticing the cracks. At first, I brushed it off. He was recovering, or so I thought. He was still weak, of course, and exhausted from everything his body had been through. But there were these subtle changes, things I couldn't quite place. And every time I asked him how he was feeling, he would give me a reassuring smile and say, "I'm fine, Mom, really." But something in his eyes wasn't the same. There was this distance I hadn't seen before, like he wasn't quite there with me anymore. I had gone through so much to give him that second chance at life. I thought once he was well, we would be able to rebuild our relationship. I imagined us going for walks in the park, him getting back to his old hobbies, maybe even finishing college. I thought we could start over, just the two of us. The idea of him being healthy, happy, and free from the weight of his condition kept me going. But I was wrong. The truth started to hit me when I got the notification. It was a regular day, just another quiet afternoon when I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through some old pictures of Evan and me. A small part of me still hoped I could fix the fractures in our relationship. Maybe, just maybe, this whole nightmare would eventually be behind us. And then my phone buzzed. A notification flashed on the screen, and I froze. Past due. $10,000. Evan's account. Gambling debts. I read it again, thinking I had misread. But there it was, in black and white. I clicked the link, and my heart sank as I scrolled through the list of transactions. Casino deposits, online poker games, cash withdrawals, and the numbers kept adding up. $10,000, $20,000, $50,000. My stomach twisted into knots as the reality of it hit me. He had been gambling away the money I'd given everything for. He had lied to me about needing it for his recovery. He had told me he was going through physical therapy, that he was following the doctor's orders, and that he was on the mend. But he wasn't. He had used my sacrifice, my desperate love for him, to fuel a dangerous addiction. He had thrown away the very chance I had worked so hard to give him. And the worst part was, I had no idea. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands shaking. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. Had I been so blinded by my desire to save him that I hadn't seen the signs? Had I been so caught up in the idea of him getting better that I ignored the warning bells? How could I have missed this? Tears began to blur my vision, and I felt this crushing sense of betrayal weighing me down. All of the sacrifices, all of the pain I'd endured to get him that surgery, it meant nothing to him. He didn't care. I wasn't sure when it happened, but somewhere along the way, Evan had stopped being the boy I knew and became someone else, someone I couldn't even recognize anymore. I thought back to all the late-night conversations we had after the surgery, the way he promised me everything would change. I thought he was finally seeing how much I had done for him, how much I had put into this, but instead, he had been hiding the truth from me, hiding the fact that he was spiraling deeper into a world that didn't care about him, or anyone else. I was just another pawn in his game, another victim to his lies. That evening, I didn't even have the strength to confront him. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to deal with it. So I spent the rest of the night in silence, wondering what had gone wrong, wondering if I had been foolish enough to think my love and sacrifice could actually save him. I kept asking myself, how could he do this? He knew how much I had given up. He knew how hard I worked to make sure he had the best chance at life. And yet, none of that mattered to him. It felt like everything I had ever done for him, everything I had ever been, was erased in one fell swoop. The following days weren't much better. I kept hoping it was some kind of mistake, that maybe I had misunderstood the bills, the charges, the withdrawals. Maybe he had been coerced into it. Maybe there was a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew there wasn't. My son, the person I loved more than anything in the world, had gambled away the very thing that I thought would bring him back to me. And that's when I realized the truth. My sacrifice had been nothing more than a tool for him to continue down a path of destruction. I wasn't saving him. I had only helped him feed the beast. My dream of a future with my son, the life I had envisioned where we healed together, shattered. It felt like the world had been pulled out from under me, and I was falling into this deep, dark hole. The son I had fought so hard for, the one I had believed in, was gone. And in his place, there was just a stranger who didn't care about the very life I had given up everything to give him. The weight of uncertainty had been pressing on me for days, growing heavier with each passing moment. Something wasn't right, and I felt it deep in my bones. I had done everything I could to support Evan after the surgery, pouring every ounce of energy I had into making sure he recovered and could start his new life. But as time passed, the sense that something was off only deepened. Every time I asked about his progress, there was a vague answer, a half-hearted promise that everything was fine. But the longer I waited, the more I began to question the truth. Something inside me kept nagging, warning me that there were things Evan wasn't telling me. I couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't being honest with me. It wasn't just the way he avoided my gaze or the fact that he was withdrawing from family and friends. It was something more, a quiet desperation that had crept into his life. One that I had overlooked because I didn't want to face it. But I knew I couldn't go on pretending. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Late one night, after Evan had gone to bed, I found myself sitting in the dim glow of my kitchen, staring at his laptop. My hands trembled as I reached for it. I wasn't proud of what I was about to do, but at that moment, I had no choice. I needed answers. I opened the laptop, my heart racing as I navigated to his bank statements and personal files. I hesitated, guilt tugging at me, but I pushed it aside. He had lied to me, and I had to know how deep it went. I started scrolling through his recent transactions, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The charges were overwhelming. Numerous withdrawals, thousands of dollars disappearing in the blink of an eye. As my eyes scanned the screen, a sick feeling began to settle in my stomach. This wasn't just an occasional mistake. This was a pattern. The money, the surgery money, the money I had worked so hard to raise by selling everything I had. It was all gone. I clicked through his history, and it became undeniable. He had used every penny of it, not for medical recovery, but for gambling. I couldn't believe it. I read the statements over and over again, hoping that maybe I was wrong, that maybe I had misunderstood what I was seeing. But it was all there: cash advances, online gambling deposits, and bets placed at casinos I didn't even know existed. The money I had sacrificed so much for wasn't helping him recover. It wasn't going to his recovery plan. It was fueling his addiction. He had lied to me. He had taken every bit of my trust, my sacrifice, and thrown it all away for the thrill of a game. I had given him everything, and he had taken it, just like that. All those sleepless nights, all those hours spent working overtime to cover the surgery costs. And for what? The more I read, the more my heart shattered. My stomach twisted with anger, and a lump formed in my throat. I had done everything for him. I had given up my home, my car, and my savings because I believed it was for a better life for him. I had told myself that sacrificing all of it would make him appreciate life more, would make him stronger, would give him the chance he deserved. But instead, it was all just a game to him, a joke. His lies had been so convincing, so seamless, that I didn't even see the warning signs. I had ignored them, thinking I was doing the right thing. But now, it was clear. Evan had never intended to change. I felt like I had been hit by a truck. The betrayal was like nothing I had ever experienced. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't even the fact that he had lied about where the money was going. It was the fact that he didn't care about me. He didn't care about my sacrifice. He didn't care about the pain I had endured to make sure he got what he needed. My son, the one I thought I had raised with love and sacrifice, had thrown all of it away. For a few fleeting moments of thrill, I closed the laptop, my hands shaking as I held it in my lap. It felt like the floor beneath me had disappeared. The life I had built around Evan, the future I had dreamed of for us, it was all a lie. I had been living in a fantasy, a dream that had been shattered by the cold, hard reality of his actions. The anger I felt wasn't just towards Evan, it was towards myself too. How could I have been so blind? How had I not seen it sooner? How had I missed all the signs, all the clues that pointed to the truth? But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the money. It wasn't just about the surgery or the way he had treated me. It was about everything he had taken from me. My time, my trust, my love. I had given him everything I had, and he had never once shown any gratitude. He had lied, manipulated, and taken advantage of me at every turn. And the worst part was, he had done it all with a smile, convincing me that he was the victim, that he was trying to get better. But in the end, it was all just a game to him. A game that he had played with my life, with my heart, and with everything I had sacrificed. I needed to confront him, but not yet. I needed to gather my thoughts. I couldn't let him see how much it hurt, how much this betrayal had broken me. I knew what I had to do. I had to face him, but I couldn't let my emotions take control. I had to be strong because he certainly hadn't been. He hadn't been strong enough to admit his mistakes, and now I had to be the one to stand tall. But for now, all I could do was sit there in the silence, staring at the empty space where my son used to stand. And I knew, deep in my heart, that nothing would ever be the same again. The moment I had feared for so long had finally arrived. The truth was out, and there was no way to undo the damage. I couldn't keep living in denial, hoping that maybe Evan would turn things around. After everything I had learned about his betrayal, the gambling, the lies, the destruction of the future I had worked so hard to secure, I knew what had to be done. I had to confront him. No more avoiding the inevitable. The time for pretending was over. The night I discovered the full extent of his betrayal, I sat in the silence of our living room, barely able to breathe. The anger swelled inside of me like a rising tide, threatening to swallow me whole. I couldn't even look at him. My son, the person I had given everything to, had shattered my world with his deceit. I could hear his footsteps upstairs, unaware that I had already seen everything. I couldn't wait any longer. I stood up, my legs shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked to his room, knocked on the door, and when he opened it, I didn't wait for him to speak. I just let it all out. "You lied to me, Evan," I said, my voice breaking as I tried to hold it together. "You used me. All that money I gave you, you gambled it all away. After everything I did for you, after everything I sacrificed, you threw it all away. You didn't even care." He stood there, stunned at first. Then his expression shifted. He didn't apologize. No, not even close. Instead, he stepped back into his room and muttered something under his breath about how I didn't understand, that it was his life and his choice. His voice was cold, almost defensive, like I was the one who had done something wrong by caring, by trying to help. It felt like a slap in the face. And before I could stop myself, I was yelling. My words came out in a rush, desperate and raw, a mixture of hurt and rage. "You think I don't understand? You think I don't know what it's like to sacrifice everything for someone you love? I sold everything I had, Evan. My house, my car, my jewelry, all so you could get that surgery, so you could have a chance at a better life. And this is how you repay me?" His eyes flickered with guilt, but it was quickly replaced by something darker. He didn't admit his wrongdoings. Instead, he started blaming me. accusing me of making him feel like a failure, of smothering him with my expectations. It was as if everything that had gone wrong in his life was somehow my fault. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. My son had completely lost touch with reality. He wasn't capable of seeing the magnitude of the sacrifice I had made. To him, it's just another problem to ignore, another thing to run from. I couldn't do it anymore. The anger was like fire in my veins, and my disappointment in him consumed me. In that moment, I felt completely alone. He wasn't the boy I had raised, the sweet, kind-hearted child I had always believed in. That boy was gone, replaced by someone who didn't care, who didn't value the love I had given him. And I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who didn't appreciate me, no matter how hard I tried. I turned to leave, and without even thinking, I said it. "Get out, Evan. I can't do this anymore. You need to leave." The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. There was a brief silence before he spoke, his voice sharp, laced with bitterness. "Fine, I'll go," he said, his words cutting through me. "You'll be better off without me anyway." I could hardly believe what was happening. Evan, my son, the one I had devoted my entire life to, was walking away without a second thought, without even an apology, without a shred of remorse. I watched as he grabbed his suitcase, not looking back even once as he walked out of the door. There was a lump in my throat, my chest tight with the pain of it all, but I didn't stop him. I couldn't. I stood at the edge of the driveway, arms crossed, feeling the cold evening air prickling my skin. The weight of the moment settled over me, and I realized that this was it. This was the end of our relationship, at least for now. I had done everything I could to help him. I had sacrificed everything for him, but he had rejected me. And now he was walking away, and there was nothing left to say. It wasn't just about him leaving. It was about everything I had given up for him, everything I had poured into our relationship. I had believed in him, in the hope that he would rise above his mistakes. But now I understood. The boy I had known, the one who needed me, had been replaced by someone who no longer cared. And as painful as it was, I knew deep down that it was time to let go. I watched as he disappeared down the street, and I stood there for a long time, my arms still crossed tightly over my chest. The tears didn't come immediately. Instead, there was just a numbness that washed over me, a feeling of emptiness that I couldn't shake. He was gone, and so was the life I had imagined for us. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew it was the right decision. I had made the choice to put myself first, to stop letting him control my emotions and my life. I wasn't going to chase him anymore. I wasn't going to beg him to stay. This was the breaking point, and I had finally crossed it. There was no going back now. The moment I confronted Evan and told him to leave, I felt a kind of emptiness in my chest, an emotional void that hadn't been there before. I was heartbroken, yes, but also something else. I was angry. I had spent so many years pouring everything I had into him, sacrificing my own happiness for his. And for what? To be lied to be betrayed in the most intimate way imaginable? I wasn't going to let him get away with it. Not without anyone knowing the truth. Not without making sure his entire family knew exactly what he had done. I'd kept it all to myself for too long. But after he left, the weight of his actions, the lies, the betrayal, everything he'd done, I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I had to expose the truth. Everyone needed to know what kind of person he had become, what he had done to me and to the life I worked so hard to give him. So I gathered the evidence, the bank statements, the gambling receipts, the texts between him and his shady friends, even the online casino records. Everything was there, clear as day. He had gambled away every penny I had given him for his surgery, every last dime that had been the result of years of hard work, of giving up everything I had for him. And I wasn't about to let him hide behind lies any longer. I didn't hesitate. I called a family gathering, telling them it was important. That's when I decided I would finally tell them all. His family, his aunts, uncles, cousins, even his grandparents, all gathered at my house for dinner that evening. As they sat around the table, I could barely look at them. I was so angry, so hurt, that I couldn't bring myself to care about how they might react. I was done hiding my pain. I was done protecting him. I stood up, holding the thick stack of documents in my hand, my heart pounding in my chest. The room fell silent as they noticed the serious look on my face. I didn't say a word, just placed the papers down on the table. The silence in the room was deafening. "What is this, Lily?" my sister-in-law asked, narrowing her eyes. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath. "These are the bank statements, the receipts from the casinos, the text messages." "Everything," I said, my voice shaking. "This is what Evan's been doing. He gambled away all the money I sold everything to give him, the surgery money, all of it, and he didn't care." There was a collective gasp. The shock on their faces was almost too much to bear. They all turned to look at Evan, who had just walked into the room, his face pale, his eyes wide with panic. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he tried to minimize it, brushing it off like it wasn't a big deal, like it didn't matter. But I had had enough of his lies. "Evan, you have no shame," I said, glaring at him. "How dare you lie to me and to all of us for so long? Do you even understand what I did for you? I sold everything I had to give you that surgery, and you gambled it away." The room was eerily quiet, except for Evan's muttered apologies, but they weren't enough. I wasn't looking for apologies anymore. I wanted them to know. I needed them to see who he really was, what he had become, and how he had betrayed me. At first, there was shock. Then came the judgment. His aunt, who had always been so kind to me, shook her head. "Lily, I can't believe this. You've always been there for him. And now this." Her voice cracked with disbelief. His mother, who had been sitting silently at the head of the table, finally spoke up. "Evan, is this true?" Her voice was soft, but her eyes were cold, filled with disappointment. And there it was, the look of shame, not from Evan, but from me. I could see them all processing the truth, but instead of siding with me, they started to shift uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact, murmuring amongst themselves. And then it hit me. They weren't going to stand by me. They weren't going to support me. They weren't angry with him. They were angry with me. "I can't take sides," his father said, his voice flat. "He's still our son." "He's not a child anymore," I snapped, my voice shaking with frustration. "I don't care if he's your son. He's an adult who made choices, and I made sacrifices that no mother should ever have to make. This isn't just about him. It's about all of you turning a blind eye, letting him get away with it. And now, none of you are willing to admit what he's done." Their faces were a mixture of discomfort and guilt, but none of them spoke up. It was like I had become the villain in my own story. Instead of standing with me, they sided with him. They didn't want to face the truth, didn't want to acknowledge the damage that had been done. I stood there, feeling the weight of their disappointment on my shoulders, but I wasn't going to back down. Not anymore. They could turn their backs on me all they wanted, but I wasn't going to protect him anymore, not after everything he'd done. And so, as the evening wore on, the tension in the room grew unbearable. Evan stood there, looking like he was ready to cry, but no one reached out to comfort him. Instead, they all sat there, quietly judging me, unsure of how to respond. I had never felt so alone in my life. When the dinner ended, Evan left without another word. The rest of the family avoided eye contact, and no one even attempted to console me. I had hoped for support, but instead, I was left to stand there with the truth in my hands, exposed and abandoned. It was the final blow. Not only had I lost my son, but now I had lost my family too. I had no one left. And yet, in that moment, I realized something important. I didn't need them anymore. I had exposed the truth. The betrayal had been laid bare, and now it was time to walk away from all of it, even if it meant losing everything, because I had already lost myself in the process of trying to save him. It had been weeks since the family gathering, and the weight of the betrayal was still heavy in my chest. I had lost my son, my family, and for a moment, it felt like I had lost myself too. But as each day passed, I started to feel something else creeping in, something small but real, a spark of defiance. I didn't know how to fix the gaping hole Evan had left in my life, but I did know one thing: I was done being a victim. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could choose what happened next. I wasn't going to let him or anyone else control my life any longer. Not anymore. It was time for me to take back the power I had willingly handed over, piece by piece, over the years. I woke up one morning and looked around my empty house. It felt different now, quieter, lighter in a way. All the things I had sacrificed, all the years spent in the background, all of it felt distant. I no longer had to be the one everyone depended on, the one who gave and gave until she had nothing left. I wasn't sure how it would look yet, but I knew I had to rebuild my life. I started small, slowly. I went through my finances, the ones Evan had left in disarray after his debts. The medical bills from his surgery still loomed over me, but the majority of the bills I had accumulated in the months leading up to that disastrous family dinner were paid. My house had been sold, and the last of the money was gone. But I wasn't going to drown in this. I began to look at my options. I wasn't ready to face the world fully yet, but I knew I had to do something. I gathered the courage to cancel the few subscriptions I had left, ones I had kept because Evan liked them, not because I cared. I terminated the services I no longer needed, the ones I had hung on to because they were his, because they were part of the life I thought we would have. I shredded old credit card bills, paperwork, receipts, things that had tethered me to a past I no longer wanted to be part of. With every paper I tore up, I felt lighter, as if a piece of the old me was being set free. I sat at my desk late one afternoon, the sun dipping behind the trees outside, casting a soft glow across the room. I had a pile of documents in front of me, including a few from the last therapy session I attended. I hadn't been sure about going at first, but the therapist had given me the tools to process the pain, to acknowledge the years of self-erasure I had lived through, and to begin the journey of healing. With each tear of the paper, I felt a release. I wasn't just reclaiming control of my finances. I was reclaiming control of my life. I was taking back my own voice, the one that had been silenced by everyone else's needs and expectations for far too long. I realized I couldn't keep living in the shadow of what had happened. I couldn't continue being the mother who had sacrificed everything, only to be cast aside. I was still here, and I still had a future. The future wasn't going to be the one I'd envisioned for Evan and me, but that didn't mean it couldn't be beautiful in its own right. I signed up for a local painting class that I had been wanting to take for years. I had always loved painting, but had given it up when Evan was younger, thinking it wasn't a priority. Now it was mine. I signed up for a short vacation as well, something I'd always postponed because of financial or family concerns. I booked a weekend away at a cozy cabin by the lake, a retreat where I could breathe, think, and just be. I also reached out to an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, but who had always been there for me before. We made plans to grab coffee, just like we used to. I had always kept my distance from friends, putting Evan first, but now I realized that I needed those connections. I needed people who saw me for who I was, not just as a mother, not just as a provider, but as Lily. The first time I drove to the cabin by myself, I was nervous. I didn't know exactly what I was running toward, or if I was even running at all. But when I got there and the quiet of the lake surrounded me, I felt the stress melt away. I didn't have to answer to anyone. I didn't have to justify my actions or make excuses for the choices I had made. For the first time in months, I felt at peace. I was rebuilding. Slowly, but I was rebuilding. I could feel the tension lifting from my shoulders as I finally allowed myself to think about me. I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot, but I could see the possibility of a life that didn't revolve around Evan's mistakes or my past choices. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope again. I couldn't undo what had happened. I couldn't make my son appreciate me, and I couldn't change the way my family had abandoned me, but I was still here. And as long as I was still here, I knew I could create something new, something better. I was taking control of my life again, one step at a time, and nothing would take that from me, not ever again. It's funny how life can surprise you. Just when you think everything is falling apart, you find yourself at the beginning of something new. I had spent so many years tied up in the chaos of others' expectations. Evan's needs, the pressure of being the perfect mother, the weight of being the one everyone could rely on. But now, for the first time in a long time, I was living for myself. And I could finally breathe. The first step was something small, something that didn't feel like a monumental change, but when I look back on it, it was. I went out and bought a small house, a cottage really, in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of town. Nothing extravagant, just a simple place to call my own. The house was modest but cozy, 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a living room with big windows that let the sunlight pour in. It wasn't the mansion I had once dreamed of for my family, but it was mine. It felt right, like it had always been meant for me. I spent the next few weeks unpacking and arranging things. It wasn't just about putting my belongings in place. It was about building a life that was just for me. The furniture wasn't hand-me-downs anymore, like it had been when I was married. I bought things I liked: soft throw pillows, new curtains, a big comfy chair by the window where I could read and let my mind wander. For the first time, I didn't have to justify every purchase or decision to anyone. It was liberating. But buying the house was just the beginning. I began to realize that there was so much I had pushed aside in order to give everything to Evan. There were hobbies I had abandoned, dreams I had tucked away because they didn't fit into my role as a mother. The old me, before the sacrifices, before the hurt, had been buried under layers of responsibility and guilt. Now I had the chance to rediscover who I was outside of being a mother, a wife, or a daughter. I enrolled in a painting class that started the following month. I hadn't picked up a paintbrush in years, but I used to love it. I had always admired art and enjoyed the quiet act of creating something beautiful out of nothing. The first time I dipped a brush into the paint, I felt a wave of nostalgia. It was like rediscovering a piece of me I'd forgotten was there. The class was small, just a handful of women, but I enjoyed every minute of it. I started experimenting with different styles: watercolors, oils, landscapes, abstracts. And I realized that, for the first time, I wasn't doing it to impress anyone. I wasn't painting for Evan or anyone else. I was painting for me. A few weeks later, I took my first vacation in years. I had always put it off. Every time I thought about traveling, I'd get distracted by something, or I'd feel guilty for spending money on something that wasn't a necessity. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. I booked a cabin by the lake, something quiet and peaceful. It was only for a few days, but those days were some of the most rejuvenating I'd ever had. I spent my time hiking, reading, and just sitting by the water, listening to the wind rustling through the trees. It was like pressing a reset button. I'd been running on empty for so long, trying to hold everything together, but now I felt like I was finally beginning to fill up again. When I returned home, I decided to take my new life even further. I joined a small book club and met with my friends more often. I'd spent so many years keeping to myself, consumed by the drama of my own family's issues, that I had lost touch with the people who truly cared about me. Reconnecting with them was like finding a piece of my soul that had been missing. I felt alive again. I laughed more. I felt comfortable in my own skin. I even started thinking about the future in a way I hadn't in years. I had always put my dreams on hold, thinking there would be time later. But now there was no more later. There was only the present. I started planning a trip to Italy, somewhere I had always wanted to go. I wasn't sure when I would go, but I was determined to make it happen. For the first time in a long time, the future felt like an open road, rather than a burden. I was doing things I never thought I would. I wasn't waiting for someone else to approve of my choices anymore. I didn't need validation. I had come to terms with the fact that I had given everything to people who didn't appreciate it. But that didn't mean I had to stop living. Looking out at the garden from my new window, I felt peace. I had weathered the storm, and though I was still healing, I was no longer defined by the pain. I was defined by my strength. I had come through the other side, not as the person I thought I would be, but as someone who was finally free to choose her own path. I didn't know exactly where that path would take me, but I was ready to find out. And for the first time in years, I was excited. The days following my decision to stand on my own were filled with a sense of calm I hadn't known in years. I was no longer being weighed down by guilt or the need to prove myself to anyone. But in the process of carving out my own space, I also realized how much I had neglected the people who truly saw me, the ones who had been there all along. When I was caught in the whirlwind of Evan's needs and the constant obligation of being a good mother, I distanced myself from the people who mattered most to me. My friends, who had been my support system before Evan's illness and all the subsequent chaos, were still there. But like me, we had all become victims of the circumstances. I had allowed my world to shrink, narrowing my focus to one person who had never appreciated what I was doing for him. One afternoon, I decided to reach out. It felt like a big step, but I needed to reconnect with the people who had once made me feel like I was more than just someone's mother. I sent out a message to a small group of my closest friends, asking them to come over for dinner. No grand plans, no expectations, just an evening together. When they arrived, I was taken aback by how quickly things felt normal again. They walked into my new home like they had always been there, laughing, joking, and making me feel like I was part of something larger than just my own life. We shared a meal, told stories, and for the first time in so long, I didn't feel isolated. It was so easy to slip into those old dynamics, the ones where we just enjoyed each other's company without judgment, without the weight of everyone else's expectations. We talked about everything and nothing at all, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was living in the shadow of my past decisions. I felt seen, heard, and valued for who I was in that moment, not for the sacrifices I had made or the mistakes I'd endured. There was something so healing in that, something I didn't realize I had been missing all those years. It was more than just companionship. It was the feeling of being part of a true, supportive community that didn't expect me to be perfect, just present. We were all flawed in our own ways, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the bond we shared, the fact that we had each other and we had chosen to be in each other's lives. Over the weeks that followed, I started inviting them over more regularly. It became a routine, a comfort. We went to movies, took long walks in the park, and just lived life together in a way I had forgotten was even possible. I had spent so much time pouring my energy into a toxic relationship with Evan, trying to fill a void that could never be filled, that I had forgotten about the people who truly loved me. For the first time, I felt like I truly belonged. Months passed, and life without Evan was quieter, more peaceful. Then, one day, he showed up at my door. His face was filled with regret as he apologized, saying he was getting help